What's up, folks? Welcome back to Tactical Tortoise. My name is Trevi, and today we're talking about money. Last week I moonlighted as a video game YouTuber. Today we're doing a financial YouTube video. Now, for those who don't know, money is a thing that many people like, and some people even have. And as some of you may know, the popular fantasy tactical tabletop miniature war strategy game known around the world as Warhammer 40,000 costs a lot of it. So today, let's talk about the most expensive units in Warhammer 40k, not just by points, but by monetary value. Now, obviously, we could just go to games-workshop.com, sort all of the products listing by prices, and oh look, it's a Khorne Lord of Skulls as the most expensive unit. Fancy that, the video's over, but that would be very lame. So let's rephrase the question a little bit and talk about the most monetarily inefficient units that you can play on the tabletop. Units that cost the most dollars per point to field in your army. And for laughs, we'll also look at how much a 2,000 point army would cost using that dollar per point conversion. Now, first off, a couple ground rules. I'm going to be using US dollars for this video, so if your area has a different pricing structure, I'm sorry, I don't know what to tell you. We're also going to be using the raw datasheet points values for each of the units that we're talking about, no upgrades involved. And we're looking at basic sculpts only, basically the cheapest option I can find in the web store for each one of these units. I'm also disregarding combo box, so things like combat patrols or command squads that include multiple entities you're supposed to play as separate units on the table. We're not going to be talking about those today. Lastly, this video took a lot of math, a subject that, according to the IRS, I am really bad at. So please like and subscribe to the video, and maybe for the sake of the IRS, you can check me out on Patreon at patreon.com/tacticaltortoise to support the channel. Let's do it. The first unit we're going to talk about is kind of a baseline. I don't know if it's the only one at this price point, but it's going to be Primaris Eliminator. These guys, for $55, gives you a single 75-point unit, a conversion rate of 7.3 repeating dollars per point. For only 3 models, that's pretty pricey, and gives you an army conversion rate of about $1,467 if you were to buy an entire army at that same price. Moving up, we have some interesting utility units as well, specifically in this case, Death Cult Assassin, who for 2 models for $20.50, a very exacting price point, gets you 26 points worth of utility on the table. That is a dollar per point ratio of 7.89 and would cost you $1,577 were you to purchase an entire army of only Death Cult Assassins. Around the same level are tactical drones. You can buy a pack of 2 of them for $16.50, getting you only 20 points worth of use if you were to assemble those both as gun drones. That said, tactical drones do come in a lot of different Tau sets, so you don't necessarily need to buy too many of them separately. These guys come out at $8.25 per point and would cost you a flat even $1,650 to buy an entire army of them. Getting a little bit worse, we have Drukhari Racks. These guys cost you $35 to field on the table and only get you 40 points worth of models. These ones do come in packs of 5 models, so the conversion is a little bit easier to swallow, but it would cost you $750 to purchase an entire army of only racks. With that new army of renown out there as well, though, an entire rack army may actually be viable, so that could actually be a purchase that someone makes or has made. Moving on, we have some significantly more useless units. The Skull Altar is the next one, at a cost of $45, giving you 50 points worth of model, a conversion rate of $0.9 per point, and would cost you $1,800 to buy an entire army of Skull Altars. I don't know why you would need an entire army of fortifications that force you to keep your combat characters within your own deployment zone, but, you know, if you wanted to do that, you could. It's up to you. Probably don't, though. Skull Altars, not that great. It's a cool idea, though. I like the design of the Skull Altar. I just wish they were worthwhile. They should make the Herald's auras global, not just like extend their range a little bit. It doesn't make sense. It's a conceptually flawed unit. What isn't a conceptually flawed unit is our next one, the Humble Warlock Skyrunner. We're going to see a lot of Eldari on this list. They are an expensive army to play, and this guy's no exception. For $35, gets you a 38-point model, a conversion rate of $0.92 per point. We're getting to that vaunted $1 pretty quickly here. That would cost you $842 to purchase an entire army of Warlock Skyrunners, but fortunately you only need 1 or 2 of these guys. Moving on, we have some more Eldari units. The classic Eldar Rangers cost, for some reason, $60 for a unit of 5 regular infantry models. I think there's a lot of additional bits in this kit, which is why they're so expensive, but man, are they really expensive for just 5 Eldar boys. That gets you a 65-point unit, a conversion rate of 0.923, which would cost you $1,846 for a full army. We have a couple more Imperial utility units in here, Crusaders being the next one, specifically Adeptus Sororitas Crusaders. The points per dollar conversion rate is better in Astra Militarum, since for some reason they're more expensive if you take them in an Imperial Guard army, but the Adeptus Sororitas ones for $20.50 get you 22 points worth of model, a conversion rate of 0.932 per point. That would cost you $1,867 were you to purchase a whole army. That's very similar to Acolyte Hybrids, who for $42 gets you 45 points worth of model, a conversion rate of 0.93, repeating dollars per point. The downside of Acolyte Hybrids is that you often need them in very large numbers, specifically in the 8th edition Genestealer Cult armies that would take enormous tides of Acolyte Hybrids to overwhelm your opponents with. They aren't taken in quite as large hordes in the current incarnation of Genestealer Cults. I'm sure the Genestealer Cult players' wallets are thanking Games Workshop for that change, but now we're focused more on neophytes. Although, to be fair, neophytes are a lot more efficient to get, and you can kind of just buy guardsmen and use those. Nobody really knows the difference. We have a couple other kind of useless fortifications on this list. The Tide Wall Shield line is the next one. For some reason, significantly less efficient than other additions to the Tide Wall line of Tau fortifications. This one, for $75, gets you 80 points of models, a conversion rate of $9.375 per point. It would cost you an even $1,875 to fill your entire army with Tide Wall shield lines. Why you would want to do that, I don't know, but it's very similar to the Big Ed Boss Bunka. And now we get to our break point. This is an Orc fortification that came out with the most recent Orc Codex. Isn't actually that bad. It has some pretty decent guns on it, although I don't think it's ever seen competitive play. The fortification rules, turns out, are very bad. But for $75, this gets you a single unit that costs you, wait for it, 75 points, which means it has a conversion rate of $1 per point. In order to build an entire army at this conversion rate, it would shockingly cost you $2,000. We have another unit at this $1 per point rate. That is the Tyrannid Biovore. Now, I'm cheating a little bit here. The Biovore does come with 3 Spore Mines, so technically it is kind of a combo unit, but not really, because the Biovore itself is supposed to spawn those Spore Mines over the course of the game and gets those for free, so I figured it was probably fine. But for $45, this gets you a single 45-point model. Also on this level, at the same cost, in fact, are Tempestus Scions, a unit that you will use once per game. They'll drop in your opponent's deployment zone out of Deep Strike, do an action, maybe score some engaged in all fronts, maybe some boots on the ground, and then immediately be killed by your opponent. And for that single use, it will cost you $45 to include a unit of 5 of these guys, meaning that they are also at that $1 per point exchange rate. And from here, ladies, gentlemen, and everyone else watching this video, it's all downhill, starting with the Battle Wagon. Now, to be fair, battle wagons are a little funky because you can purchase for them tons of options. So this one's a little bit weird, but for $110, you get a 105-point base unit, a conversion rate of 1.047. That would cost you almost $2,100 to buy an entire army of only entirely naked battle wagon. In one of my recent videos, I talked about how silly some of the Adeptus Mechanicus units looked, specifically Sidonian Dragoons, and they're getting another little showcase on this video as well, because they, for $60, gets you a single 55-point unit. You can take them in larger numbers as well, which means you could be spending these guys at their $1.09 per point exchange rate in larger and larger unit sizes. To include an entire 2,000-point army at this exchange rate would cost you $2,182. Flayed ones are at a similar point for $55, getting you a 50-point unit, a clean $1.1 per point exchange rate would cost you $2,200 to build an entire army of flayed ones. And similar to some of the other units we talked about today, that army may actually be viable, especially with the new Army of Renown, that a lot of people already own 60 flayed ones because they're at that 50-point level. So that gets pricey real quick. Cerberus Raiders are one that is constantly on this list and has been, I think, since they were released. They have mostly been undercosted for the vast majority of their lifespan, which has made the fact that the unit costs $60 for a pack of 3, $20 per individual cavalry model, for a unit that only costs you 54 points on the table, a little ridiculous. This is an exchange rate of 1.11 and has really hurt the wallets of many an Adeptus Mechanicus player since the faction was initially released. Now from here, we're going to get into the territory of some weird old Finecast models that Games Workshop forgot that they continued to make. The Pyrovore, which inexplicably costs $45. I remember when these little guys got released, and I remember them also being inexplicably expensive for a single entity unit. Back in the day, too, they were one of the only units in the game that exploded. They were so bad upon release that they were actively worse for your army. They would make your army less powerful if you included Pyrovores, which was really an interesting design decision. These guys, for $45, get you a 40-point model, a conversion rate of 1.125, and it would cost you a clean $2,250 to build an entire army of. That said, Pyrovore is now actually pretty good, although less so since they're a little bit more expensive than they were upon the 9th edition Codex release. We also have a bunch of Kroot in here. My heart goes out to Kroot players trying to play full Kroot armies because in an effort to make Kroot more playable in the more recent editions of the game, Games Workshop has reduced their points cost pretty precipitously, which has made them get absolutely reamed by the prices of old crappy Finecast models, starting with Krootox Riders, which for $29 gets you a single 25-point model. A $1.16 to point conversion would cost you a nice $2,320 to include an entire army of. Kroot Hounds are in a similar place, although they are $30 for a pack of 4, which only costs you 24 points on the table, a $1.25 per point conversion. That would cost you a nice $2,500 to build a whole army of. And given the fact that Kroot Hounds are one of the most useful units in the Tau Codex, that's unfortunate for Tau players, because y'all gotta shell out for a couple of units of those guys. This is almost the exact same situation for the next unit on the list, which is the Cyberwolf. I knew these guys didn't have a great conversion ratio. I wasn't quite prepared for how bad it was, because a single 15-point Cyberwolf, probably the best bespoke Space Wolves unit in the entire game, costs you $20.50 for one Cyberwolf. A conversion rate of $1.37 per point would cost you $2,733 to build an entire army of Cyberwolves. Fortunately, Cyberwolves are a generic enough unit that a lot of people use other wolf-like models to represent them on the table, and to be honest, you only ever need like 1 or 2 of them to fill out your fast attack slots in a Space Wolves detachment, but man, are they good on the table. So they're really putting the screws to you, those GW folks, for all these utility units that can do screening and actions and grab objectives, stuff like that. Now, those are our runners-up, but for the top spot in the list, we actually have a 2-way tie between 2 units out of different Xenos factions. I've talked a lot about Xenos factions, it feels like, in this video, because Xenos get kind of hammered by the dollar to point conversion ratio. The second most monetarily inefficient unit to include in your 40k army, the Eldari Warlocks. The only tiebreaker here is that these are a pack of 2 rather than our number 1 spot, which is a single entity. But the cost per unit and model are the same. In this case, $55 for a pair of Warlocks. GW loves to upcharge their character units, and I think this is the same with the Warlock Skyrunner. They charge you character prices for a unit that is taken oftentimes in multiples. In this case, taking 2 Warlocks costs you only 40 points, which is a conversion of $1.375 for every point. That would cost you a nice, clean, and easy $2,750 to build an entire army of these guys. And that brings us to the number 1 spot. This is the Orc Mech Gun. My heart goes out to all the Orc players back in the day who felt like they had to play the multiple mech gun list, the smash-a-gun spam lists, that brought like 9 of these things because they're wildly expensive for something that doesn't cost that many points at the table. $55 for a single 40-point. To be fair, they come with the Gretchen with them, although, as we've talked about in my recent video about the artillery and crew rule, those are considered the same model for all rules purposes except for measuring distances, which is a can of worms. This puts them at the same price per point conversion rate, $1.375 per point for a $2,750 price tag on a full army. And that is my list of the top, 23 most inefficient units in Warhammer 40k. But that said, I did this by basically going through and comparing all the units in the Games Workshop web store to their points values, and I may have missed a couple. So if you have any that you think should be on this list that I didn't talk about, throw them in the comment section. Now, we did talk a lot about the price of a Warhammer 40k army in this video, and I do think it's important to mention here that the price conversion that I described isn't really an accurate depiction of how much a 40k army costs, which is usually between $800 and $1,000, so significantly less than any of the conversions I talked about here. But to be fair, that is still a lot. The difference between 40k and basically any other miniatures game is that Warhammer 40,000 demands a ridiculous number of these miniatures to actually play the game. Dozens more miniatures than any other game and hundreds more dollars in order to play, which is what ends up driving the price of an army up so high. So I guess if I have a point, it's that Games Workshop stuff is expensive and you don't always have to buy everything directly from them. Probably least of all, the units on this list, which are just too expensive. And with that, I'll go ahead and wrap up the video. Thanks everyone for watching all the way to the end. I really appreciate you. Thanks everyone as well who supports the channel, either over on Patreon at patreon.com/tacticaltortoise, YouTube channel members, Twitch subscribers, all those people who help me keep the lights on here are great. I love you. We keep it classy, folks, and have happy and affordable wargaming.